So I'm very pleased to introduce Painting Pairs, Art History and Technical Study, which is a research opportunity for graduate students enrolled in the MA in the History of Art, the MA in Curating, the Art Museum and PhD programme to work with master's students and postgraduate diploma students in easel painting conservation. It's supported by the Research Forum, the Courtauld Gallery and the Department of Conservation collaboratively. So each pairing explores the contribution of technical study and art historical scholarship through research on a painting that's undergoing analysis or treatment in the Department of Conservation now. The paintings are drawn from private and public collections, including the Courtauld Gallery. So we'll hear contributions of paintings from all of those places today. So this programme is now in its 12th year, which is absolutely fantastic because it's always popular amongst the students who don't have to do it, but they volunteer to do these collaborations. So I want to especially thank the co-organisers of the programme, Acacia Binbo, who's supporting the Research Forum, is absolutely brilliant, Karen Sayer from the Courtauld Gallery, curator, who's co-organises with this programme, and in particular Pippa Balch, who's here, who works really hard to source the really great pictures for this programme. So this year we've got 6 pairs of graduate students working together to undertake research that focuses on paintings that are now physically here, or at least at Somerset House in the Conservation Department. And this is the first presentation. And the pairs at this presentation will introduce themselves and the paintings they're working on, and the questions that they've decided to investigate in the coming months. The research will culminate in a second presentation for each of the students, which will be on the 4th of May here again. So today we're going to go from old to modern in terms of the painting's dates, or presumed dates, with the first presentation by the first pair, Megan Buchanan-Smith and Nandeepa Mabere, who will introduce Salvador Mundi from the Courtauld Gallery. And at the end of each presentation there's going to be a little short time for questions if anyone wants to ask questions. And for those people who couldn't make it today, this is going to be recorded and it's going to be on YouTube for a month, I think, after the event. So please welcome the first painting pair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Megan, I'm the conservation student at the Courtauld.
And I'm Nandeepa, and I'm the MA Curating student. And today we will present on the Courtauld Salvador Mundi, giving an introduction to our technical and art historical methods and outlining our initial research questions. So as you can see, this is just the basic kind of tombstone information. It's attributed to someone in the circle of Marco de Giorno. The subject is Salvador Mundi, and it's dated to the early 1500s.
So we have 3 research topics, and these were decided after discussion with the gallery's curator and conservator, and we hope that our research will be used in the future when decisions are made about the painting's display and preservation. So first we would like to consider the painting's provenance and then why it has been attributed to this artist or circle of artists, and then looking at its condition and conservation history with the hope to provide some guidance for future conservation, and then finally to look at its relationship to other contemporary versions of the Salvador Mundi, in particular this one pictured here, attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, and we will look at how the panel compares both stylistically and in terms of its materials and techniques.
So provenance is a really useful starting point, so considering the history of ownership and kind of building an idea of the layered meanings the work has had over time. And so that's where we began our research. We looked at the object file in the Courtauld collection and tried to kind of build a timeline, which you can see over here, and sort of build questions around this timeline. So the presumed date is between 1510 and 1525. It was acquired by Thomas Gambier Parry, and we've got two dates for that, which stem from two lists. One from 1860, which was written by Gambier Parry himself, kind of taking a survey of his collection so far. And then the other one is from 1897, which is a list that his son compiled, and sort of based on notes and revisions that Gambier Parry made in 1875. And so, yeah, the first one mentions Bergamo in 1842, and then the second list mentions Verona, a palace near Verona, in 1851, and that kind of information came with this work in 1967 in the Gambier Parry bequest to the Courtauld. And so, yeah, questions that kind of emerged for us around the timeline included the possibility of the work being produced in Milan, so the initial attribution to Giorgio, him being an artist associated with Leonardo in Milan and working in Milan, and then also just kind of the information that we have on the work, whether a lot of that actually just came from Gambier Parry, who sort of was an artist and collector and kind of put together lots of information about his works, but some of that has been kind of challenged and questioned over time. And on the back of the painting, there are these seals that we've taken, these kind of high resolution images of, that we want to kind of spend time looking into, and potentially taking rubbings, looking at other kind of works that Gambier Parry acquired, either like in those cities or between those years, if there are any kind of similarities to build kind of a more clear picture of the object's biography.
Okay, so now moving on to condition and conservation history. The painting is done on a single hardwood board with two dovetail battens in the back. It has suffered significant woodworm damage in the past, and you can see the scattering of woodworm exit holes all over the back of the painting, but also they are dotted around the front of the painting where the insects penetrated through wood, ground and paint layer. This can be seen in the detail on the right. And the board's thickness, combined with its susceptibility to woodworm damage, are indicative of poplar, and poplar was the primary wood used by Italian Renaissance artists due to its availability and its technical suitability for painting supports. It has undergone some structural treatment in the past, primarily to the bottom two corners, one which has been built up with wax and lead white fill material, and then the second one on the left, which has been completely reconstructed with a wooden insert and then repainted. I'm hoping to compare the paint composition of this insert with the rest of the paint surface to try and date when this restoration was done. The edges of the panel appear to have been cut down and exposed to woodworm channels, which you can see on the left there. But we also discovered this black and white photo in the Courtauld's object file, which is thought to have been taken soon after its arrival at the gallery. And you can see that extra wood pieces were nailed onto all four sides of the painting, expanding the composition to include Jesus's, the end of Jesus's right sleeve and also the top of the halo around his head. These do not appear to be original, and other versions are closely cropped, as ours is in its current state. This is most likely an aesthetic decision possibly made by Gambier Parry, but these additions were removed at some point before 1977 when a condition report was done at the Courtauld. It appears that the additions were having an impact on the movement of the panel, and since their removal it has warped and caused some areas of tenting paint where the pressure from the woods movement has caused flakes to partially detach and kind of peak into a tent-like shape. And this is most obvious in the red robe and can be seen in breaking light and in the detail on the screen. And these were not present in the black and white photograph. And then also having a close look at the painter's service has raised questions about the media used. On the Courtauld website, it is listed as egg tempera on panel, but on close inspection it has the appearance of oil. Particularly looking at the red robe, there is this drying defect, which looks like a fast drying paint was applied over a medium rich slow drying paint, causing this kind of uneven surface phenomena, and that's much more characteristic of oil paint. So this is something I'm going to continue to look into. And in general, the paint surface has suffered. There's a lot of discoloured retouching and also areas of loss that expose the wooden support, seen in the top right. The extent of the damage is shown in this X-ray, where the losses appear dark and are most obviously concentrated in Jesus' face, neck, and then the orb he's holding. Overall, the condition has been quite difficult to determine because of this patchy surface coating, with areas appearing very glossy and some areas appearing quite matte. And at the moment, I think that there are multiple varnish layers on this painting, as indicated by this UV photo, where the varnish layers fluoresce. And you might be able to see that some areas like the background and Jesus' sleeve have a more kind of extreme greenish fluorescence than maybe lighter areas like the face and the blessing hand. So it's possible that a previous conservator did some partial cleaning and left an old varnish intact in darker passages. So I'm hoping through my analysis to ascertain how many varnish layers there may be, and also characterise this kind of light brown hazy surface coating that's found across different passages, as I think this will all be quite important if a cleaning is pursued in the future.
So turning to the wider context around the work, I'm going to return to the tombstone information. So it tells us the work is dated to the early 16th century, and this is done by kind of looking at the style, and as Megan's kind of pointed to, our technical inquiries so far have also confirmed kind of the presence of materials and techniques that you would expect to find for this time period. And then there's also kind of the issue of attribution. So when it initially came to the Courtauld, it was attributed to Marco di Giorno. This has since kind of been broadened to the circle of Marco di Giorno. And at the moment we haven't found kind of who is included in that circle, as di Giorno kind of, there isn't a lot of archival sources surviving relating to him, and then a lot of his kind of works are now lost as well, so that's kind of presented a challenge to us. But then there's also the context around the subject of Salvator Mundi. As you can see, it kind of fits within this this kind of popular genre. There are kind of common conventions and shared kind of visual vocabulary, but there's also kind of instances of artistic creative kind of decisions and autonomy. So kind of things that you expect to see, the right hand raised in blessing, and very importantly the left hand creating an orb or a globe. In our case it's a globus cruciger, but you can see there's kind of variation, and that sort of changes the meaning of the work ever so slightly. There's an emphasis on symmetry, and later versions also feature kind of cross strips of fabric that would have sort of been recognisable to contemporary viewers, sort of relating to the gowns of priests and the stoles. And they also all kind of have a similar resemblance, and that's due to the kind of there being an authorised portrait of Christ that these artists would have been working from. And so that is kind of where we are at with situating the work within that context. And then moving on to sort of why is it interesting and topical right now. Obviously, kind of the first thing I think that comes to mind if you've heard about Salvator Mundi is the Leonardo that was sold in 2017 and broke records as the most expensive painting ever sold at auction. And then more recently, there seems to have been sort of renewed interest in not just Leonardo, but his followers and the followers of his followers, as seen in the case of this most recent Salvator Mundi that was sold for €1 million at Christie's last November.
So thinking about how this painting fits into this visual history, we're going to try and situate it by making comparisons that are both visual, looking at specific features, but then also looking at the materials used. So I'm going to use various forms of technical analysis, including infrared, X-ray fluorescence, and cross-sections in order to identify the panel preparation, whether there's any underdrawing present, the layer structure, and then the composite pigments. And then luckily there have been a few technical studies on obviously the Leonardo Salvator Mundi, but also paintings that are attributed to D'Ogione. So I'm hoping to do some comparisons between our findings and what's being found here. For example, looking at the grounds in the various paintings, and this could be quite telling as different grounds were used at this time. For example, in the Leonardo's Salvator Mundi, it's 2 layers of lead white in oil, whereas in D'Ogione's the Virgin and Child is a gesso ground, so calcium sulfate. So it'll be a quite interesting thing to pursue. So in terms of next steps, and hopefully what we'll present at our next presentation, we're hoping to look more into the Gambia-Parry connection, looking at what he was collecting around the time and how those have been treated. We're hoping to visit the National Archives in order to look at his family documentation. We're also hoping to consult some experts. So we're already in correspondence with Robert Simon, who's the art dealer who acquired the Leonardo in 2005. And then we're also hoping to track down someone who has a bit more information about D'Ogione, as we're yet to find kind of extensive information about that particular artist. Then, of course, I'm hoping to undertake further technical study in order to better situate the painting, and then hopefully, ultimately, we'll make a suggestion for how this painting should be treated. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, well if we stick to time, I think there will be some time at the end for questions for everyone. So let's hold the thought there. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Talia Rattenville. I'm a conservation student, and this is Jean-Michel Mouvre. Today we'll be introducing the 2 paintings that will be the focus of our research, St. Sebastian and St. Anthony Abbot, both of which are in the collection of Henry House in Surrey. These paintings were done in oils and are painted on panel. They are currently considered to be 16th century and of Venetian origin, though this attribution has yet to be confirmed by the painting's provenance or their materials. Saint Sebastian is depicted here on the left. He was supposedly martyred in the early days of the Roman Empire. It is said that then Emperor Diocletian, upon discovering Sebastian's faith, had him tied to a tree and shot with arrows. This event did not kill Sebastian, but has been memorialized as evidence of the saint's suffering. St. Anthony Abbot, in contrast, is revered for his long and quiet practice of asceticism. Many consider him to be the father of Christian monasticism. What is most interesting is that both saints were considered to be protectors against infectious diseases. This might explain why these two saints were paired together, though the panels could also have been part of a larger series. The style of painting seems to be generally consistent with the 16th century. The figures are well rendered, but lack the fuller modeling of flesh and a degree of movement that is characteristic of Baroque figures. St. Sebastian stands in a languid contrapposto pose, reminding us of the classical Greek statues from which many Renaissance artists drew their inspiration. These initial observations have prompted the major questions which we will hope to answer through our research. In our case, these questions are quite broad. Firstly, when were the paintings created? Secondly, where were the paintings created? And thirdly, what were the intended functions of these paintings? That is, were these paintings intended to serve as private devotional objects, or were they constituents of a larger altarpiece? Of course, it is not our expectation to be able to obtain a definitive answer to all these questions. Our overall strategy throughout this project will be to narrow in on answers to these questions through a multidisciplinary approach involving several complementary streams of research. This will be further explained by my colleague.
Yep. So before we get into our methodologies and the avenues that we're going to pursue afterwards, it's first really important to understand what we're actually looking at, so the provenance of these two panels which we have. And also the source of the attributions and whether there's any space to wiggle around and question that. So first and foremost, actually, it's most important to recognize the tremendous debt we owe to, in particular, Alistair Lang, who's provided a very useful transcription of all the archives at the back of the Ham House Yale book published in 2013, from which we can look at the estimate of pictures, which we think was collated in 1683, the year by the Duchess of Lauderdale, the year after her husband, the Duke of Lauderdale, had died. And it's quite a special document. Not many documents like that exist from the time. And it does perhaps date to the fact that she was trying to value her assets and raise some capital. And we can see already from here, from the transcript, that we've got a number 5, St. Sebastian of Leonard Davonshaw, valued at £25, and a number 12, St. Anthony of Leonard Davonshaw, valued at £25. Now, quite a topical link to the previous presentation would be that Leonard Davonshaw was an anglicization of Leonardo da Vinci, which you might want to laugh at that, because immediately you had counter-valuation by Jan Vick in the same year, who crossed that out and said, by Italian hand, not £25, please, £5. But yeah. And again, thanks to Mr. Lang, he's not only transcribed all the archives, he's managed to match them with the locations they would have been in the house. Again, sorry, so this is a slide that confirms, I think, the link to the 1683 document. We've got St. Sebastian, Leonard Davonshaw, £25, Pretium. And on the back of the panel, we've got a nice little sticker with number 5, which corresponds to the list in the inventory. But again, like I was saying, so if we can link these two pictures to the Duchess's private closet, as Alistair Lang does, it would mean that that particular closet was built by the Duchess in between 1672 and 1674. So there's that. The Duchess of Lauderdale was, sorry, I should probably explain this a bit better. The owner was sort of the custodian of the house, and she had inherited it from her father, William Murray, in 1655. However, continuing to look at the archives, we can see that from the Duke's collection in 1679, we have catalogued as being in the Green Closet, 14 pictures with gilt frames, 2 of these gone to Her Grace's private closet. And then looking at the corresponding list for Her Grace's private closet, we've got 4 pictures with gilt card frames, whereof 2 small ones. And we think these might be our 2 panels. The reason why I'm really emphasizing this is because William Murray's The Green Closet was mostly, well, renovated and decorated in the 1640s and the 1630s by the Duchess's father, William Murray. Now, if that is the case, we can actually push the provenance back to William Murray and try to sort of understand where you might have been able to get this picture. And you can see here the 2 pictures were actually hanging in the Green Closet at the end of the 19th century, as you can see there on the left. So William Murray was quite close to Charles. He was actually part of the original retinue when he was still Prince of Wales that travelled to Spain to go meet the Infanta at the court of Philip IV, where I think Charles and the rest of the courtiers caught, I guess, the Italian bug for collecting Italian pictures. And they all came back afterwards, and William Murray, I think, decorated his green closet in a very Italian way. In fact, the panels at the top were decorated with figural copies of Polidoro da Caravaggio's panels, which Charles actually bought and are now in the royal collection. So William Murray also spent a lot of time in the Spanish Netherlands, traveling to, again, Spanish Netherlands in 1632, and in 1640 again The Hague on official court business. Now, it's not for sure that we can link these two paintings to William Murray, but it's true that there are a lot of continental collections or connections that I think can broaden the possibilities of further collection. Now, in order to, again, the attribution is, I think, tangential at best. Already in 1683, there was that big question of, is it, Leonard Davenshaw was questioned already, by an Italian hand, and that sort of attribution seems to have been carried forward into the 1911 W.C. Joel catalogue and valuation. And then, as far as I can tell, or as far as we've seen, this Venetian epithet was attached by Alistair Lang and Nina Strachey in their 1994 essay. And you can see at the bottom here, he's given the caption for the Saint Sebastian. Apart from that, it doesn't seem like there's anything in the provenance that really would indicate or link these pictures to Italy or to the continent in particular. So I think that gives us space, I think, to continue with our inquiries, where I would hope to proceed with methodology that looks a lot more at the iconographical qualities of these two figures and how we might be able to determine through perhaps the position of Saint Sebastian or the particular monastic garb that Anthony's wearing, whether we can link that to a particular period, region, or school. To give you an idea of I guess, perhaps the diversity and wealth of some Saint Sebastians that exist, ours is quite peculiar. He's got his right arm raised and his left arm kind of lodged in the nook of a tree. Here you've got Mantegna's famous Quattrocento Sebastian, as in Italy at the period quite commonly depicted, with hands behind your back against an Antica column. A bit later, you saw the Ma Sebastian leaning against a tree, and then Parma Vecchio Sebastian in Venice at the beginning of the 16th century, which does look kind of similar. Then, what do we have here? To a retable, a gilt polychrome retable from Spain in the 16th century, and then again, early 17th century gilt bronze plaque as catalogued by the Met. Again, so these are only the early stages of the avenues, and this will require a lot more time spent in the photo archive, collections like the Wit, trying to determine, I guess, iconographic avenues of research that would then inform what we learn from the more technical studies that Talia will be conducting.
Right, and I'll now discuss a few aspects of these materials and techniques that I'd like to investigate further. Firstly, as you can see here on the left, there are grooves in the black paint along the border which correspond to the outlines of compositional features underneath. These are what the arrows are pointing to. In some places, the black border also has a ridge or a lip, as if it were painted while the painting was in a frame and butts up against that frame as the paint was being applied. Here on the bottom right, you can see a detail of an X-ray taken of Saint Sebastian. In an X-ray, pigments which contain heavy metals such as lead or mercury will appear lighter. Unfortunately, this X-ray is not very clear, since the back of the panel also has been prepared with an X-ray dense substance, but still you can see that the contours of the foot seem to continue beneath the black border. These pieces of evidence suggest that the black paint is unoriginal. These borders may have been added to redefine the sight size of the painting while it was being fitted into a new frame, though further technical study is needed to confirm this presumption. You can also see that the paint along the edges of the panels has a brighter tonality than the rest. Sorry, I'll actually go back to that previous slide. This phenomenon commonly happens when the pigments and varnish on the edges of a painting have been protected by the frame from agents of deterioration, though it is also true that some of these areas could be retouched. In any case, the discolored varnish is certainly a contributing factor to the painting's brownish-yellow appearance. The paintings would benefit from the removal and replacement of this varnish layer so that the original tonal relationships can be better understood. Next, you'll notice that the background features have been painted in rather loosely, with broad brushstrokes of thin paint. This you can see particularly clearly in the left detail image of Saint Sebastian. While these features may be partially obscured due to the degraded varnish, one might wonder whether these paintings were commissioned by a patron with a modest budget, or whether they were completed in a small workshop where the task of rendering the background was given to a young apprentice. In any case, the painting supports are of high quality. The panels are made from a radial cut of wood. Radial cut boards are the most stable and least likely to warp. The boards are also unusually thin, about 4.5 to 6.5 millimeters in thickness to be exact. The fact that these thin boards have not warped significantly is a further testament to the quality of the wood. What is really interesting is the species of the wood itself. The wood has strong, prominent rays, as is visible on the right, and its pores are arranged into these lines which you can see on the left. These are features of a ring porous wood species like oak, and definitively rule out poplar. This is important because the overwhelming majority of panel paintings in Italy, at least in the 13th through 16th centuries, are made on poplar, whereas oak was used predominantly in the northern countries. It would be exceptionally unusual to find an Italian panel painting from those centuries on oak. Furthermore, the backs of the panels seem to have had white ground applied, followed by a blackish-green paint layer. This preparation is in fact characteristic of mid to late 16th century panels made in the northern countries, and has in fact been described in several Guild manuscripts and painters' manuals from that time. The chalk ground would be followed by a brown, green, or black paint layer, most often bound in oil but sometimes bound in glue. These two aspects, while by no means definitive, certainly motivate us to question the current attributes of the paintings as Venetian attribution. In my investigation of these queries, I plan to use the following methods of research to investigate the questions I have. Firstly, technical imaging. Technical imaging includes techniques such as infrared reflectography and X-ray radiography. These imaging techniques are based on the understanding that different wavelengths of light are better absorbed by some materials than others. Consequently, the techniques can help suggest the presence of certain materials in the layers of the painting. For example, infrared reflectography reveals the presence of carbon-based materials such as graphite or charcoal. Analytical techniques such as microscopy and X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy can be used to probe certain elements of a material's morphology or chemical composition. I plan to use these techniques to better understand the composition of the ground, the layer structure of the painting, as well as the likely pigments employed by the artist. Excitingly, the support itself will be investigated through dendrochronology. Dendrochronology is essentially a method of dating wood and locating its geographic origins based on the similarity of the pattern of its growth rings to known sources. The process is much like matching fingerprints to an individual, where the accuracy of the result depends on the quality of the reference data which you have. This examination will be carried out by an expert in the field, but I am really excited to incorporate their findings into my research. Finally, I hope to remove and replace the varnish on at least one of the two paintings, though this will depend on discussions with Ham House and time constraints. As stated earlier, this will help reveal the original color scheme had by the work. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sophia Gonzalez, and I am a conservation student.
And my name is Abby Lee, and I'm the art history student. And today we will introduce our painting titled St. Jerome from a private collection, along with our initial research questions.
The painting St. Jerome depicts the saint seated at a table with a melancholic pose as his right hand supports his head and his left hand points to the skull. The panel painting came to the Courtauld for conservation treatment from a private collector. The owner purchased the painting from the auction house, William Wass, in 2021 with the attribution to a follower of Jus van Cleve. The previous owner is known to have inherited the painting, however, there is no clear information regarding its history.
The painting has neither a clear date of creation nor an established provenance. It is unclear how the auction house made its attribution, except on compositional grounds, as no art historical or technical analysis has been published. And the only initial clues for the provenance of this painting is the strong visual similarities to the paintings of St. Jerome in an interior by Use Van Cleef in his workshop from the 16th century. Therefore, Van Cleef is our starting point for understanding the art historical context of this painting.
Jos van Cleef was born around 1485 to 90. He was likely from the lower Rhinish region, or the city named Cleve, from which his name is derived. He began his artistic training in the workshop of Jan Royce around 1505, where he assisted in painting the wings for the high altar of the Nicolai Kirche in Calgar, which includes a self-portrait. Van Cleef is believed to have moved to Bruges between the years of 1507 and 1511 due to his works displaying the characteristics typical of Bruges painters. He moved to Antwerp in 1511, where he became a free master in the Guild of St. Luke and acted as deacon until 1529. He is known to have ran a large workshop with at least 5 pupils and other assistants, which produced a large variety of religious works and portraits, and was succeeded by his son Cornelius van Cleef, who ran his workshop after his death around 1541. Van Cleef's early work was representative of Calgar and Bruges, particularly in his approach to iconography, which was influenced by Van Eyck and Robert Campin. His later works show Italian influences, particularly in his appropriation of the themes and techniques of Da Vinci, particularly in his use of sfumato in the paintings of the Virgin and Child. The gap in documentation of his activity in Antwerp between 1535 and his death in 1541 is assumed to be filled with travel, as confirmed by a passage in a book, which states that Jos van Cleef of Antwerp was summoned to paint Francis I of France and Eleanor of Austria. There he is thought to have been acquainted with the works of Da Vinci.
St. Jerome in the interior is one of 3 subjects from Van Cleef's mature period that was replicated and copied. Paintings of St. Jerome were produced by the artist in his workshop in 3 basic types: penitent amid a desert landscape with the attribute of a lion, a half-length in a cluttered studio, often with a skull on his desk, and lastly in a study naked to the waist and holding a rock. While St. Jerome in Penitence follows an established visual theme, the 2 images of St. Jerome in his study are distinctly different for being set in an interior. The first of these, a work from the Princeton Art Museum, follows the depictions of St. Jerome painted in Antwerp in 1521 by Albert Dürer, while the second type, the Norton Gallery painting, is a composite of Jerome as a scholar, as a penitent, and as a witness to the Last Judgment. Both images are heavily influenced by the spiritual and intellectual environment in Europe, especially Antwerp, in these years around the Reformation.
The depiction of St. Jerome became increasingly popular in Northern Europe after the Dutch humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam published the Saint's Letters in 9 volumes. He subsequently published the Novum Testamentum, which contained the Greek text notes, and Latin translation of Jerome's Vulgate, as well as a bibliography of the saint in 1518. Both visual and literary depictions of Jerome emphasize his role as church father and exemplar of penitence and humanistic scholarship. Dürer's engravings evokes the ideal of contemplative solitude, which appeals to the humanists. Erasmus of Rotterdam praised Dürer's engraving, saying that only he could express absolutely anything in monochrome. The engraving shows Jerome writing at a table and his lion and dog at slumber, equally peaceful in the foreground. The light of his halo and the sunlight pouring in through the windows are in perfect equilibrium, and recurrent horizontals in the composition add to the pervasive sense of repose and harmony. The mathematical perspective creates an image of intellectual and spiritual discipline, as well as referencing Jerome's controversial translation of Jonah 4:6 through a gourd. Dürer's paintings for Rui Fernandes de Almeida in 1521 is a departure from the previous depiction. Dürer shows Jerome as an old man with carefully rendered wrinkles and a white beard, and as witness to the Last Judgment. The image serves as a memento mori through the inclusion of a crucifix and a skull. Both the print and painting of St. Jerome and his study later inspired later artists to create works on the same subject in a half-length composition and pose, including Van Cleve, who made the nearness and inevitability of death more explicit in his own paintings.
With this brief account of Use Van Cleve behind us, let us consider the different versions of St. Jerome in interior by Van Cleve and his workshop and other followers. The market success of this composition can be seen by the numerous copies that have been preserved, leading to the questions of originality and of its relationship to the artist and his workshop. The composition of St. Jerome in interior vary in quality, but the most esteemed being the painting at the Harvard Art Museum. Similar to the Princeton version, this painting places the saint in a large room and more architecturally elaborate room, which contains more iconographically significant objects. This painting is most confidently attributed to Van Cleve with the help of technical imaging and dendrochronology. Infrared reflectography, otherwise known as IRR, has revealed a carbon-based underdrawing which shows many artistic changes. For instance, the omission of a bird cage suspended from a wire in the ceiling. Further examination of the underdrawing has also led to the discovery of a decorative frieze on the back wall with the words Anno 1521, which identifies this as one of the earliest iterations of Van Cleve's St. Jerome. Subsequent versions are simpler in their composition and formal details.
The later St. Jerome in the Princeton Art Museum collections is emblematic of a painting created for the market. The leading scholar of Van Cleve, John Oliver Hand, attributed the work to Van Cleve's workshop through the quality of its execution of the painted surface, rendering of texture, thinly painted yet glistening skin tones, and attention to detail. Yet infrared reflexology shows a carbon-based underdrawing with some cross-hatching, as well as corrections to the stoppered bottle on the shelf and placement of the hanging rosary beads. However, due to its size, simpler background, and less detailed rendering of light and surface, this painting is thought to be of lesser rank. Similar issues occur in the attribution and differentiation in other workshop reproductions for the marketplace.
The multiple images of St. Jerome created by Use Van Cleve in his workshop were both popular and enduring, as the composition would survive beyond the artist's death in the 1540s. The work by Anthony Bream, which is shown on the screen, further indicates the survival and popularity of Use creation well into the 17th century. Bream, a pupil of Godfrey Schlacken of Leyden, known for his master of candlelight, was active in Dordrecht. The only paintings known to be by this artist are copies after old masters, indicating the legacy of Durer and Van Cleve's depiction of St. Jerome and the marketplace for reproductions of images in the 17th century. This is exemplified by Bream's quotation of both Durer and Van Cleve's and his choice of composition and visual details in the background. While the cardinal hat and letters on the back wall recall Durer's famous engraving from 1514, the painting shares a visual equivalence with many of Van Cleve's work.
Having compared different versions of St. Jerome in his study, we return to this painting of St. Jerome from private collection. The artist imitated Durer's prototype by copying the half-length format and the melancholic pose of the saint in a similar manner as Van Cleve. However, there are details in the background which distinguish the painting from his works. Jerome occupies a confined space which hangs a brush, possibly an aspergillum, an unlit candle, and a wall sconce, and a shelf of books. In addition, there is a suggestion of a windowsill edge, which departs from the leaded windows and with circular shadows depicted by Van Cleve and his workshop. Upon our initial examination, we noticed an illegible cursive script written along the side of a book on the upper right corner, which may be an artist's signature. However, this is uncharacteristic of Van Cleve's workshop, and the painting by Bream is the only known version of this size and quality to be signed.
Our initial examination of the painting has been affected by the current condition of the painting. There are large campaigns of retouching underneath a very yellow and degraded varnish. The extent of retouching is hinted by the dark areas in the UV. As part of the conservation treatment, the unoriginal varnish and retouchings will be removed, which will allow us a better way to see the original materials and techniques used by the artist in this painting. So our technical analysis and the conservation treatment will seek to answer the following questions. What was the painting made for and for what purpose?
Can the panel be dated within the lifetime of Van Cleef and his workshop? Was the painting made for a patron or mass market? How does the painting reflect the proliferation of depictions of Saint Jerome during the 16th and possibly 17th century? How does the composition relate and differ from versions attributed to Use Van Cleef, his workshop, and other followers? And how can the materials and techniques contribute to our understanding of the painting and its period? Due to the existence of different versions painted by Use Van Cleef, imitations of the master by members of his workshop and followers, it is difficult to make a definitive statement about the authorship of this painting. The departures from the conventions of Van Cleef's depictions make it extremely difficult to art historically date the painting through visual comparison. Going forward, technical analysis of the materials and techniques will hopefully provide a date and bring us closer to an attribution for this painting. Thank you. Any questions?
We have got time. If anyone has any? If not, think about it, and at the end we.
Great, yes.
I know, I said that yesterday.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Wright, and I'm studying for a Master's in Art History.
And I'm Elizabeth Subal, and I'm in my second year of the conservation program at the Courtauld.
So today we'll be guiding you through the initial work we've completed on our painting, Girl Reading the Task, which belongs to the Cooper and Newton Museum in Olney, Buckinghamshire.
So to begin with, I will give a quick overview of the painting's main characteristics and its physical condition upon arrival to the studio. Then Emma will tell you about the historical background of the painting and its context and the subject matter of the women reading. Further, we will present what we know so far about the painting and will introduce you to our first findings. And finally, we will conclude by outlining the questions we would like to answer throughout our further research, our methodology for doing so, and the conservation treatment goals for the painting.
So here's the painting, Girl Reading the Task. The composition shows a 3/4 length portrait of a woman reading a book. The painting is undated and unsigned. In addition to this, the identity of neither the artist or the sitter is indicated anywhere on the painting, and there are various unknowns we will be trying to answer throughout our upcoming research and collaboration. The two things we do know are the immediate provenance. The painting was presented to the museum around 1900 by Henry Willett of Brighton. And we can also see that the girl is reading Book 4 of the 18th century poet William Cowper's 5,000-line poem, The Task.
The painting's condition was initially examined upon its arrival to the Courtauld's Conservation Department in May 2022. It is supported by a wooden stretcher and there are no inscriptions or labels present. The painting is lined, which means that the original canvas was adhered onto a secondary fabric support. The type of lining adhesive could be identified as glue paste by examining a fiber sample and its swelling response to moisture underneath a microscope. The original canvas does not have its tacking margins anymore, and the surrounding areas of the lining canvas have been painted black to cohere with the dark background, as can be seen in the central photograph. The tension of the painting's fabric support is very slack, and there are distortions in the canvas, which can be observed in raking light, visible in the photo on the right. In addition to these undulations, the painting has many severe structural damages. Several tears and holes are present in both the original and lining canvas. When it arrived to the studio, the painting was faced with tissue paper, securing damaged and flaking paint to the surface. By visual analysis and its solubility, the adhesive used to secure the paper could be established to be wax resin.
This was then confirmed by FDRR analysis of the sample. After its chemical identification, the pasting could then be removed accordingly and the loose and friable paint consolidated. And after this, the now unobstructed surface of the painting could be more closely examined, and it became visible that the painting is covered with a thick and yellow varnish. The stark contrast between the areas that are covered by the varnish and those that are not show how degraded it is and how much it obstructs the painting's legibility. Examination of the painting under ultraviolet light showed the characteristic green fluorescence and confirmed the presence of an aged natural resin. Since the painting has undergone a lining treatment and has been faced, it is highly unlikely that this is the artist's original varnish, and to re-establish good saturation and a balanced tonality, it will be removed. Visual assessment of the paint layers, paired with their examination under a microscope, showed that the painting is covered by extensive amounts of both overpaint and retouching. There seem to have been at least 3 different campaigns of retouching, all of which have aged differently and are visually impairing to the painting. Additionally, the uppermost paint layer has a wrinkled appearance, especially pronounced in the face of the sitta, which is indicative of a drying defect. Interpreting the findings from elemental analysis using X-ray fluorescence, a reduced color palette for a girl reading the task could be established, consisting of only a small range of pigments, including mainly lead white, differently colored iron-containing pigments, and vermilion. All of these were commonly used and broadly available during England in the 18th and early 19th century. Further pigment and material analysis will be carried out throughout the continuing conservation treatment, which will hopefully aid us in approximating the date of the painting and its reworking campaigns.
And now to move on to Cooper himself. William Cooper was born in Hertfordshire in 1731, the son of Reverend John Cooper and Anne Cooper, who tragically died when he was 6 years old. He had a comfortable background. His great-uncle, Earl Cooper, was Lord Chancellor of England, but despite being one of the most popular poets of his time, he regularly struggled financially and was often dependent on friends and family to help make ends meet. He also battled depression and suicidal thoughts throughout his life, particularly after being forbidden from marrying his cousin Theodora by his uncle, and then experiencing the death of his father and best friend within the same year. Following a year at an asylum near St Albans in 1763, he moved to Olney, where he met John Newton, author of Amazing Grace and curate in charge, with whom he wrote a number of well-known hymns. With Newton's encouragement, Cooper became involved in the abolitionist movement, writing 4 poems in support of its cause. We also have Cooper to thank for the phrase, "Variety is the spice of life." In the 1780s, he had his most successful period, in particular writing The Task in 1785. This epic poem was inspired by a friend, Lady Austen, which, before we get ahead of ourselves with historical literary possibilities, is not Jane Austen, who would have been 10 at the time. On hearing of Cooper's complaints of writer's block, Lady Austen wittily suggested he write a poem on the insignificant subject of a sofa. The result was Cooper's supreme work, The Task, 6 books covering, amongst other things, the vices of city life versus the pleasures of the countryside, the retired life and a religious faith, and attacks on blood sports, slavery, the frivolity of fashion, and French despotism. The Cooper and Newton Museum was founded in 1900 by Thomas Wright, the Olney schoolmaster, author, local historian, and William Cooper fan. Wright campaigned tirelessly for several years to establish the museum, eventually based at Cooper's old residence in Olney, and encouraged fellow Cooper enthusiasts to donate objects. One of the early donations was this painting, as the museum inventory record shows. It also gives us our only piece of provenance. The painting is presented by Mr. Henry Willett of Brighton. In the 18th and 19th centuries, women reading books were a common and popular motif. Cowperland, Gainsborough, Romney and Constable amongst countless other examples.
So, to now go back to the painting's physical and material condition, after the facing was removed and any flaking paint consolidated, technical imaging was undertaken to investigate the materiality of the artwork and gain insights into its method of creation and previous restoration campaigns. The X-radiograph seen here then revealed that the original composition had been altered and that there previously was a second figure present, of a child present in the background. The figure is visible in this X-radiograph due to the paint containing heavy elemental components, presumably lead, which absorb the radiation more and show up brightly in the photograph. Further alterations to the initial composition can be seen, such as the reworking of the woman's facial features, most prominently her mouth, and the alteration of the size of the book she's holding. An infrared reflectograph image of the painting was subsequently taken to show any potential underdrawing. Since the infrared waves are absorbed by carbon-based materials such as charcoal, underdrawing and other carbon-based compositional changes can be made visible by this technique. In the case of the girl reading the task, it exposed the subtle changes that had been made over time to the architecture in the left background and the sitter's face. Most importantly, however, the IR photograph also revealed that the writing on the book identifying it as the task is in fact not original, but was applied on top of another version. Whether this compositional change had been made by the artist himself or was a later addition has to be further investigated. It is important to say, though, that this discovery does not mean that the link to the Cooper and Newton Museum is not present anymore, but rather that there is a different link than previously assumed. So, the main question that links together art historical research and the practical treatment of the painting is that of its layer structure. Through both visual analysis and technical examination, it has become clear that the painting has been repeatedly altered and transformed throughout its life. The layer structure will become more clear by the examination of, for example, cross-sections, but the underlying reasons thereof can only be answered by a combination of both art historical research into the painting's history and provenance and the progressing conservation treatment.
Henry Willett, here shown in the 1890s with his granddaughter Joyce, was a hugely influential collector on the south coast of England. The youngest of 11 children, he was a wealthy man through the family brewing business. An imposing presence and a, quote, gentleman well known in Brighton for his high character and social spirit, end quote. Willett's passion for collecting started in 1850 and lasted right up until his death in 1905. His main residence in Brighton was described by the author Oliver Wendell Holmes as being, quote, filled with choice works of art, fine paintings and wonderful pottery, end quote. Willett's primary focus was on ceramics, and his extensive collection was donated in 1903 to the Brighton and Hove Museums. Alongside pottery, he also collected fossils, leading excavations on the South Downs, and fine art, with a particular interest in major works from the Italian and Flemish Renaissance. Here are just three of his collection. His approach was, shall we say, somewhat chaotic. As an example, The Holy Family by Giorgione, which you can now see at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., was purchased in Brighton for £20 and then swapped with a frame for Madonna and Child with Angels by the Maître de Moulin. Willett was also a regular contributor to the Royal Academy Winter Exhibitions. I believe that Willett donated Girl Reading the Task to the Cooper and Newton Museum based on his belief that the important aspect of an artwork was the human interest associated with it, not its aesthetic merits or rarity value. I have already started investigating the link to Henry Willett, and a couple of weeks ago, whilst reviewing archived material at the V&A National Art Library, I had one of our most exciting discoveries. Henry Willett loaned 60 of his oil and watercolour paintings for an exhibition at Brighton's Royal Pavilion in 1873. You can see another one of the artworks that was on display, a portrait of Dr. Johnson by Francis Reynolds. On reviewing the exhibition catalogue, I found an entry for a portrait of Lady Austin with a description that exactly matches the girl reading the task. It seems highly unlikely that Willett would own two portraits of women reading the task, so this is strongly suggestive that, at least in 1873, the sitter in our painting was believed to be Lady Austin. Although Lady Anne Austen's friendship with William Cooper only lasted for 3 years, during that time he produced his greatest work, with the diverting history of John Gilpin and the task. Indeed, so striking was Lady Austen's influence that K.E. Smith described her as, quote, Cooper's muse, end quote. I have investigated portraits of Lady Austen, first finding this engraving after Romney in the National Portrait Gallery. However, on reviewing Romney's catalogue raisonné, Kidson cast doubt over whether the sitter is indeed Austen. Notably, in 1792, Romney and Cooper became friends, Romney producing this portrait of the poet, completed at the house of William Hayley, who was Cooper's biographer, whose portrait he also painted, with Cooper responding with a poem. I also found this Romney painting of a woman with a strikingly similar dress to that of our sitter. So, bringing all of this together, we have several questions we want to answer. Firstly, we aim to establish provenance beyond Henry Willett in 1873. Now, given the sometimes disorganised nature of his collecting, this may prove challenging. So, having already reviewed material in the V&A National Art Library and the Paul Mellon Centre, we are now seeking his artwork inventory through the Brighton and Hove Museums and East Sussex Council archives. We will also review the Cooper and Newton Museum's archives to see if we can find correspondence between Henry Willett and the museum, as well as considering Thomas Wright's own archives held by Buckinghamshire Council and Wright's father, W.S. Wright, who was also a painter. We will also further investigate whether the sitter really is Lady Austen and whether there is a link to Romney or any other artist active at the time. It is particularly intriguing that our portrait appears to have been titled Portrait of Lady Austen in the 1873 Royal Pavilion exhibition, but was entered in the Cooper and Newton Museum inventory as Girl Reading the Task. Was there a reason for this? If we are unable to establish an artist and a date, we are also considering whether we could establish a rough date via the clothing of the girl in the painting, detailed pigment analysis, and via comparison with other similar works.
As I have mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the painting is in poor condition and requires both structural and aesthetic treatment to restore its visual integrity and overall stability. The most pressing issues for the painting are its numerous structural damages as well as the impairing of the discoloured varnish and overpaint to its aesthetic legibility. My proposed treatment steps are thereby the following. The degraded yellow varnish will be removed as well as any discoloured non-original retouching. Throughout this process, I'm hoping to unpack the various reworking campaigns and to get a better understanding of the physical history of the artwork. In the end, I will hopefully have uncovered the original paint layers and composition. Once cleaned, tam-ending and incorporation of canvas inserts will be carried out. At this stage, the planar deformations in the canvas and paint layers will also be addressed. More extensive structural treatment in the form of de-lining, which is the removal of the original canvas from the lining canvas, and relining it onto a new secondary fabric support will be required. This will offer additional support and stability to the original canvas. After all of this, the painting will be revarnished and paint losses filled and retouched. And finally, the framing of the painting will be improved to protect it from environmental fluctuations and the accumulation of dust. Throughout my practical work, I will be carrying out technical and material analysis to try and better establish the painting's materials and the artist's technique. And hopefully by bringing all of these findings together through our collaboration, in the end we will be able to answer at least some of the enigmas that this painting poses. Thank you very much for your attention today. Any questions? Yes, there's one.
Presentation. I was just wondering, is it usual in other pictures of women reading to be able to read what book it is they're reading? Is that like a very, do you think that's like sort of,
Well,
unusual?
the ones I've seen, I haven't seen any writing on them, or at least it's just squiggles. So yeah, I suppose it is unusual. In that regard.
And the underlying composition is just squiggles actually. And then the task was put on top of that. So it is quite unusual and is therefore the link to the museum, I think. And yeah.
Do you want to say about Mr. King?
Oh, there's an inscription on the other side of the book, on the other page, which reads Mr. Cumant, and we have not yet been able to find out who that is, if that's a character from inside the book, or if it's a real person that was somehow connected to either Cooper or Willett or Wright. Yeah.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Is there like a particular symbolism of women reading during this period? Is it just a sort of general sign of feminine gentility, or is it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the theme, feminine gentility. Yeah, I think that's what I read. Yeah.
Yes?
Just short question. Your last statement is that you're going to restore the painting back to its original level. I was wondering whether you could comment on that, given that there are alterations in the painting, what that really means.
It's, especially with this painting, it is really hard to speak of an original, and I probably should not have used that term. I have started doing varnish removal tests and have uncovered that there are several layers of overpaint that are quite extensive, and since the painting's composition has been changed so many times, it's actually really hard to tell when which compositional change has happened and who might have done that. And especially with the ones that are kind of further, that are closer to the ground, it is impossible to tell if the artist has made those alterations or not. So I am very aware of these things, and I am taking all of this into account, and I am looking at cross sections to see if there are interlayers of varnish present that would sorry, I'm thinking of the word, that would lead me to believe that the paint above those interlayers would be non-original. But it is definitely something where you have to be very careful, think about it a lot, and rather be less invasive than too invasive. Thank you.
But you mentioned the wrinkling of the paint in the face due to poor drying. Do you think that's a function of the way the paint was applied, or perhaps changes, or do you think something was mixed into the paint?
That's a very good question. So with the one of the paint layers that I believe is overpaint seems to be resin containing, because it is very soluble in the solvents that are solubilizing the varnish. So it is, but that paint seems to not be present in the sitter's face. So I think it has more to do with the application of the paint rather than its matrix itself in that area. But yeah, that has to be researched and investigated further. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Alexandra Earl and I'm an easel painting conservation student.
And I'm Cara Matarata, MA and Art History student.
Today we'll be introducing you to the Barred Gate, an early 20th century unfinished oil painting by the British female artist Evelyn de Morgan. This painting belongs to the De Morgan Foundation, which was established by William Eunice Sterling, an ardent collector of antiques and Victorian paintings.
In this presentation, we will outline the context of this painting and the research questions that we hope to investigate by combining art historical study and technical analysis. We will introduce key events from Evelyn's life, discuss what we know so far about the artist's material and techniques, as well as the painting's condition and physical history. To our knowledge, this is the first painting by Evelyn de Morgan that has been examined using in-depth technical analysis.
We are incredibly thankful to Sarah Hardy, Director of the De Morgan Foundation, for providing us with the opportunity to research this painting and for sharing her expertise with us.
We are also indebted to Dr. Emma Merkling, whose PhD on Evelyn de Morgan has provided an essential starting point in our attempts to contextualize this enigmatic painting within Evelyn's prolific body of work. The Barred Gate portrays a king clutching a purse of money, climbing the rocky steps to heaven and being halted by a barred gate. The moral of this image is to surrender the pursuit of wealth and fortune in order to obtain higher happiness. This is likely a biblical reference. Matthew 19, verses 16 through 26 state, "It will be hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God."
This iconography is fundamental in understanding Evelyn's employment of symbolism to express spiritualism and her moral values, both of which will be expanded upon later in the presentation.
Mary Evelyn Pickering was born in 1855 to upper-class parents. Both parents had noble lineage, and her mother was in fact of the Spencer Stanhope family of Cannon Hall. Evelyn was educated at home by tutors alongside her brothers, giving her access to subjects that girls her age typically were restricted from, such as classical literature and mythology.
Despite coming from an artistic family herself, Evelyn's mother held conservative views about her pursuing art, stating that I, quote, want a daughter, not an artist, end quote. Therefore, Evelyn used poetry to express her socialist, spiritualist, and feminist values at a young age. In support of her ambition, Evelyn's father eventually hired a tutor in the 1870s to teach her how to draw and study from old master paintings.
Evelyn joined the Slade School of Art in 1873 as one of the first women to attend. She was a pupil of Sir Edward Poynter, who painted the aesthetic style, and it was at this point that Evelyn began exhibiting.
In 1883, Evelyn met the ceramicist William de Morgan, who she would ultimately marry. At the end of the 19th century, William's career as a ceramicist was failing to turn a profit, making Evelyn the sole income generator. This meant that she was especially reliant on patrons such as the Scottish shipping magnate William Emery. The outbreak and horrors of World War I immensely impacted Evelyn, and she turned to her symbolist practice to express her sentiments, leading to a pacifist theme in her paintings.
Although her work has been subject to critical neglect, Evelyn was undoubtedly a painter who defined the expectations of her class and gender to become one of the most impressive artists of her generation. Her luminous canvases, which evoke messages of feminism, spirituality, and material wealth, make her incredibly relevant today.
Beginning in 1875, Evelyn studied medieval altarpieces and Renaissance painting in Florence, where her family friend George Frederick Watts lived. The influence of Quattrocento artists like Botticelli is especially apparent in her masterpiece Flora. The figure of Flora is certainly based on Botticelli's Primavera, but one could argue that the rich greenery, swirling drapery, and vivid flowers are instantly recognizable as Evelyn's unique visual language and innovative use of color.
Evelyn's work is also often associated with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, in being stylistically similar in terms of the jewel-like colour, elaborate drapery, and microscopic detail. Certainly, Evelyn's practice can also be compared to Pre-Raphaelitism regarding her adoption of religious narrative, realism, and the desire to challenge social concerns by looking to the art of the past. Although the Brotherhood were a group with social consciousness who successfully worked to fulfil their own agenda, Hardy has argued that their provocative paintings also created a male-centric visual landscape which appeased the Victorian patriarchal society, whereas Evelyn's work is a visual representation of her direct rebellion against the class and gender conventions of her time.
From 1910, Evelyn's paintings shifted from expressive and realistic to purely symbolic. The Undiscovered Country contains overt symbolism taken from Christian iconography. The imagery is derived from the Book of Revelation and is a visual representation of the spiritual transition that occurs at death. Note the skull on the ground. It is thought to be a pair with the barred gate. With this in mind, we can see the barred gate not as a human individual climbing a set of stairs, but as a symbol for the soul attempting to pass from one realm to another. Likewise, the bag of coins that the figure holds can be seen as a symbol for earthly possessions, and the crown as a symbol for status, both of which are repeated in Earthbound. The theme of rejecting material greed in pursuit of spiritual wealth features often in Evelyn's works, most notably in The Worship of Mammon, which similarly depicts a crouched figure adorned in delicate drapery and a money bag comparable to that in the barred gate. The male character in the gilded cage, who is surrounded by his worldly wealth, also acts as a reminder that the inevitability of death renders material wealth useless.
The barred gate is in fairly good condition, with only minute areas of abrasion and evidence of undulations in the canvas, which have likely been caused by fluctuations in humidity, as well as dirt lodged behind the strainer bars. Upon arrival to the Conservation Department, the painting had a thick layer of dirt and soot, having been caught in a fire in 1991 at the Barley Art Storage Unit. To our knowledge, the painting has never been displayed and there is no record of a past conservation treatment. There was evidence, however, of a cleaning test which was conducted during a survey of the De Morgan collection in 2008. As you can see by the photomicrograph of the surface cleaning test, the unveiled colour and tone is striking. In order to gain better insight into the condition of the painting, I have removed the initial layer of black soot using saliva and a cotton swab. Although the appearance of the painting has improved slightly, dirt remains ingrained in the interstices of the canvas and requires further removal. This is due to the fact that the distinct vividness and beautiful clarity which is characteristic of Evelyn's paintings is currently concealed. A compelling aspect of this painting lies in the label on the reverse, handwritten by Wilhelmina Sterling, Evelyn's younger sister. A section of the label reads, "The last picture painted by Evelyn de Morgan, unfinished. She was working on this 5 days before her death."
The possibility that the Barred Gate was one of the last paintings Evelyn worked on is an exciting thought. However, it is important to note that doubts have been expressed concerning the veracity of Sterling's claims, so we must take her narrative with caution.
In thinking about the provenance of the Barred Gate and the theory that it is unfinished, we intend to investigate the cataloguing of this painting further, as well as any correspondence written by Evelyn and Sterling to achieve greater clarity of Evelyn's output leading up to her death.
One of our key areas of interest is how this painting was made. From her writings, it is undeniable that Evelyn demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of the materials and methods employed in making oil paintings. William Holman Hunt's letter to Evelyn, in which he asks for her insight regarding how to take his painting from dull to rich and lustrous, also emphasizes that Evelyn was recognized and admired for her technical skill and material knowledge.
Notably, Evelyn had an account in the Robeson archive, which she started in 1884 and placed her last order 4 days before her death in 1919, therefore echoing her sister's description on the label of the Barred Gate. The archive indicates that Evelyn generally used Robeson's pre-stretched and double-primed canvases before the 1890s. In the case of the Barred Gate, the column and stamp on the reverse indicates that she sourced this particular canvas from Winsor & Newton. The canvas is primed to the very edges, which suggests that it was cut from a large roll of pre-primed canvas. In determining the materials employed in the Barred Gate, we plan to use a combination of light microscopy and elemental analysis to examine paint cross-sections. This significant step will help to answer questions about the specific pigments used by Evelyn, which may help to date the painting, as well as reveal information about the artist's preferences. Acknowledging the absence of technical analysis of Evelyn's other paintings, we hope to examine and compare the materials used in this painting with 19th century and early 20th century artistic conventions. A next radiograph of the Barred Gate reveals that Evelyn thinly applied the paint with extreme detail and accuracy. It is also apparent that the figure and drapery were painted first, followed by the sharply delineated gate and the rocky background, as both elements do not overlap the figure. There is no evidence of major changes to the composition, which indicates that the artist executed this particular painting using a strict working method. Additional technical analysis, such as infrared reflectography, has further indicated that Evelyn used a carbon-based material to meticulously sketch fluid lines that outline the drapery, gate, and shoes prior to painting. The absence of technical study on Evelyn's other paintings means that it is currently unknown whether Evelyn consistently used underdrawings to plan her compositions.
However, we are aware that Evelyn produced exquisite studies of compositional details to ensure realism in her final paintings. Evelyn's drawings not only reveal her technical skill, but help us to understand her working process. She would prepare loose compositional drawings, mainly using gray or brown paper. Her double studies of clothed and nude figures are particularly interesting, revealing her obsession with the human form and desire for accuracy. By studying Evelyn's drawings in the Foundation archives, we hope to explore Evelyn's drawing technique further and identify whether there are existing studies for the Barred Gate.
In ultraviolet light, there is evidence of a thin, uneven varnish layer which fluoresces greenish blue. This fluorescence, along with the glossy but discoloured appearance of this coating in visible light, suggests that it is a natural resin varnish. Upon closer inspection, It appears that this resinous media has been selectively brushed on sections of the gate, drapery and background, perhaps suggesting that this was part of Evelyn's technique, rather than an intended final varnish layer. The use of the varnish-like material as an interlayer applied before later paint has been discussed by Joyce Townsend and Sally Woodcock in technical literature on 19th century practices. A comprehensive study of artists' oil painting instruction manuals and handbooks, together with further technical analysis, will provide a better understanding of the nature of this layer. Furthermore, it will help ascertain the ethical and practical issues presented when considering the cleaning of paintings of this nature.
Moreover, comparing the visual and material similarities between the barred gate and other works by Evelyn will help distinguish whether Evelyn typically varnished her paintings or whether this was undertaken without her knowledge as standard practice at the time. Nonetheless, the unfinished nature of the barred gate provides a valuable insight into Evelyn's complex working process. In terms of our next steps, visits to see Evelyn's drawings at the De Morgan Museum will be vital in investigating the artist's working process. Moreover, the opportunity to see a variety of Evelyn's paintings at the Watts Gallery in Whitewick Manor will help construct a more complete picture of the artist's iconography and techniques.
Complementing our research into the barred gate, we will use information regarding the physical history, elucidated through technical analysis, to better understand the painting's making and meaning. In particular, the plan to conduct further analysis on cross-section taken from the painting will help distinguish the artist's choice of pigments and reveal Evelyn's method of painting the barred gate. Regarding the conservation treatment of the barred gate, next steps involve removing the remaining surface dirt to gain a clearer comprehension of the image and the condition of both the underlying varnish and paint layer. Before conducting further treatment, discussions with Kate Edmondson, a paper conservator at the Courtauld, have been made to safely remove the vulnerable and damaged label on the reverse. Ultimately, the intended display of the barred gate alongside the label will be taken into account throughout the treatment of this fascinating painting. Due to the considerable surge in interest and the recent attention that the De Morgans have received, we hope to uncover new details that will inform ongoing research regarding Evelyn's materials and techniques. We thank you for listening and we welcome any questions that you may have.
You mentioned that the paper label is fragile. What is the benefit of removing it?
To prevent further damage. So we've already lost a section of the label. I can just show you again here. So you can see my mouse. This, oh you can't see, sorry, but you can see where the writing is missing, that section, because it hasn't been supported by the strain bar behind, it's been lost. At the moment there's only a thin layer of Melanex covering the label to help prevent further damage, but I think it would benefit from removal and then display alongside the painting, so there's still that context there.
Thank you.
Have you had a chance to see other De Morgans in terms of the varnish? I'm just thinking about...
No, not yet. That's our plan, is to visit the Watts Gallery and the Foundation to have a look at the paintings.
It's an interesting conundrum.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the vividness of her palette, and then...
Yeah, I think it's partly due to the dirt that's still on the surface, but the varnish or the resinous layer that has been applied has definitely discoloured as well.
Mm.
What is the date of the other sort of final paintings? Like, what is the kind of query of this being the last painting or not? Are there paintings from the same year, or is it kind of just about sort of almost romantic notion that she's was working on it just before her death that's in dispute?
I think it's partly both. In Wilhelmina's writings, she mentions another painting that was supposedly painted 4 days before Evelyn's death. So it's unclear whether this is accurate, but we'd have to look further into the other paintings in Wilhelmina's writings on that as well.
If it's been varnished, you kind of start to wonder, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to ask, will you explore the notion of unfinished in the context of the note and the later paintings?
Definitely.
And I think it's already been discussed in the last talk, but if you varnish in between and then rework, it's not unknown, it's quite well known in the 19th century. So the presence of a varnish layer doesn't necessarily mean it's finished.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's part of her working process, and perhaps she was planning
What if
her
it was
plan.
one of her last paintings that leads you to think that it's a working practice? Maybe not.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Well, you're going to look at
We will
other
find
pictures,
out.
aren't you?
Is there any visual evidence of it being unfinished? Or is it just this?
I think, in comparison to paintings that I have seen by De Morgan, it lacks in certain detail and obviously the vividness that is so characteristic of Evelyn's paintings. There is also no evidence of the signature, and I believe that Evelyn did normally sign her works when she finished them.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out that basically from one of her last exhibitions in 1916 until her death, there's no record of what she made or when, and there's no list of the paintings that were available in the studio as her death. So it's really hard to date any of the paintings from the 1890s really onwards.
Yeah, it's the challenge, and it's difficult to rely on Wilhelmina's writings as well.
I may have missed it, but did she have a gallery, or was she just connected with the family?
Well, the first gallery she exhibited at was, I'm not sure to say, Grosvenor Gallery. Grosvenor Gallery. And after that, I think she kept exhibiting, but she also had a few pretty stable patrons that would often commission art from her. So I think sometimes it would just skip the gallery entirely and just go straight from her to the patron.
Any questions? No? Thank you.
All right. Excuse my voice today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Dusso, and I'm the conservation student.
And I'm Chloe Glass, I'm the current master's student.
And today we're going to present the portrait I Am Coop by Catherine Frances Clausen, the painting we have been assigned for this project and which has come to the Courtauld Conservation Department from the Braintree District Museum in Essex, England, and is currently undergoing treatment.
So our goals for the presentation today will be really to introduce you to the painting's subject matter, as well as a brief overview into what we currently know of the art historical context and the relevant social histories tied to this object.
We'll also cover a brief discussion of the current condition of the painting and the concerns that will inform both our research and subsequent conservation treatment. Throughout, we will aim to illuminate the main research questions that have become the focus of our investigation into the piece, including how technical analysis may contribute to the development of those questions, and how we plan to direct our collaborative research as we progress with this project, all of which we will also summarize in our final slides. So we'll introduce you to I Am Coop, a portrait of a female sitter presented in half-length and quarter profile, seated at a desk with a typewriter and telephone in front of a large set of windows looking out into an urban landscape. A limited but vibrant color palette and painterly, almost impressionistic style was used to create the image of Miss Coop and her surroundings, with visible brushstrokes and a sensitive emphasis on the portrayal of light. The painting was created in 1927 by Catherine Frances Clausen as part of the Old Iron Portrait series, a collection of 48 paintings in total, commissioned in the late 1920s by the Courtauld Window Company of a selection of their employees, and depicts I Am Coop, a PA to the director of the company.
The Courtauld Window Company began in 1849 as an ironmongery, and in 1907 secured a patent for a steel-framed window design. This signature design became very successful, and the company expanded to global operations by the 1930s. Notable buildings that you might have seen around London with Courtauld windows include Tower Bridge, the Tower of London, and the Houses of Parliament. The fact that a commercially successful company invested time and money into sponsoring and producing an extensive artistic campaign celebrating employees points to the unique value of this old iron portrait series and presents a chance to more deeply study the intersection between art and industry in early 20th century Britain. As a company, Courtauld operated with a particular emphasis on employee life and well-being. They built and opened Silver End in 1926, which was a model village alongside their factory up in Essex. Silver End was designed to provide workers with homes and social venues that catered to their needs, including a department store, cinema, health clinics, and a community hall that hosted art exhibitions. The old iron portraits were commissioned by the company as part of the celebration of the opening of Silver End and would hang on the walls of the village hall, pictured above, for a number of years afterwards. In fact, this image here highlights one of the art exhibitions that was hosted at the community hall. In 1935, Samuel Courtauld, the founder of the Courtauld Gallery, loaned Van Gogh's Peach Trees and Blossom to the village hall in Silver End. Courtauld's loan was part of a 1930s project in which works of art were sent to communities that did not have their own museums or galleries. The Silver End show here was the first of these exhibitions, called Art for the People, and continued until 1940. The Braintree Town Hall in Essex was also gifted by the Courtauld family and further emphasizes their desire to encourage civic and artistic engagement in smaller communities. The town hall was opened in 1928, and today many of the Braintree Museum's works, including many of the portraits, are housed in its archive. This extraordinary relationship between Courtauld and Courtauld and Braintree really showcases Samuel Courtauld's philanthropic mission to bring art engagement to communities outside of London, and also leads us to investigate what impact this relationship might have had on the creation of the portrait series.
48 paintings of the Old Iron series document 47 name sitters, with 1 duplicate sitter, and were executed by 25 artists, some of whom created multiple portraits for the set, while others painted only one, such is the case with our artist, Miss Clausen. The Braintree District Museum, located in the town where one of the largest Courtauld factories operated for many years, boasts an extensive Courtauld window archive of materials, including 28 of the Old Iron portraits, Miss Coop amongst them. Little is known about the criteria for either artist or sitter selection beyond the information provided in the catalog that accompanied them, indicating that they were created by rising artists, selected by artists and professors associated with London art schools. George Clausen, a Royal Academician, was the lead nominator for the catalog. It is our hope to explore whether more can be learned about the criteria of this specific commission and about the significant connection between the Courtauld Company and the art world of the UK, including why this company chose to celebrate its employees through the medium of art and how they used the portraits. Our artist, Catherine Clausen, was born in New York in 1886 and lived out the majority of her life in London. After studying at the Royal Academy from 1908 to 1913, she continued as a working and exhibiting artist, specializing in painting and etching until her death in 1936. Catherine was the daughter of Sir George Clausen, the Royal Academician and nominator of the Old Iron Project, which adds to questions as to the means of her specific involvement in the project, especially relative to the other artists chosen, as she herself would have graduated from her time as an art student over a decade prior to the Old Iron Commission.
Moving on to the series themselves, here we have a selection of works. And the majority of the works in the Old Iron portrait series were depicted male employees, almost all of whom are shown in the same 3/4 length portrait format. We've highlighted these 3 paintings as they are representative of main themes we've identified in the series. On the left hand, you have Men at Rest, and then the 2 works on the right present men holding their tools of the trade, including both factory workers and what seem to be perhaps managers. What is the precedent for, we wonder, and what is the impact of a series like this that includes portraits of employees at different levels of the company created during this time period and moment in British history? Furthermore, these portraits of women brings in a larger historical and societal conversation as well, where we will study what, if any, precedent exists for portraying women at this time in Britain, especially as although only 5 female employees of the 47 employees were depicted in this series, They all include women at work. Here we have secretaries, a nurse, and the wife of the company's owner, Frances Criddle. And from left to right, we have Ms. Dearlove, our portrait, Ms. Coop, and Ms. Plaistow, who are all examples of office workers. In fact, this photo shows the team of the London office apparently photographed during their lunch break one day. The magazine says that their harried expressions indicate they wanted to get back to work. Although, I don't mind a long lunch break. But since Irma worked in the London office, we can surmise that she is one of the 5 women shown here, but we're working on identifying specifically which one she might be. This will provide an interesting photographic comparison then to the portrait we have, the oil portrait. The inclusion of employees who work at offices not located in Silver End leads us to also wonder whether the portrait series, as a set or individually, were ever exhibited outside of Silver End, perhaps touring around the UK. The catalogue that Kat referenced earlier contains black and white images of the portraits, and tracking down which other archives hold these catalogues might provide some clarification on the physical history and provenance of the Old Iron Portrait series.
Amongst the series, Ms. Coop's portrait is one of the few examples with a detailed and location-specific background. Placing Ms. Coop in the records as a member of the London office, we were able to inquire of the archives of the Braintree District Museum as to the location of the London office during the years of the Old Iron Portrait Commission. It turns out the building is still standing and is not far from Somerset House on High Holborn Street. And it is our hope to access the building and take a photo out of Ms. Coop's office window nearly 100 years later. This comparison will not only provide more detail for the object file, but having a potential further reference, even true to life, of the background visual will help as an aid in the conservation treatment of the painting. Speaking of, I'll now give a brief overview of the condition of the painting as it entered the department. The painting was executed in what is likely an oil medium on a commercially primed linen canvas, stretched onto a 4-member 8-key wooden stretcher. It is signed by the artist and has an identifying label on the verso. It is unfortunately impossible to talk about this particular painting as an object and image without discussing its damage. Records from the Braintree Museum indicate that the piece was removed from display and given emergency facing in 2019 due to extensive and active paint flaking and associated paint loss in many areas of the picture plane, which is visible here as lighter patches even through the barrier of the applied facing. Facing, which you might have seen in one of my colleagues' earlier works, is a temporary conservation treatment in which a reversible adhesive is used to attach a layer of support, here a paper tissue, to the face of paintings with damage that may be exacerbated by handling. The proposed conservation treatment plan will begin with the removal of this previously applied facing and involve 2 major stages. First, structural treatment to address the flaking and stabilize the fragile paint layers, and second, an aesthetic treatment to address the legibility of the image through the reintegration of losses. With its current damage, it is clear that interventive treatment is needed before Ms. Coop can rejoin her fellows from the set. The specific treatment will be informed by technical analysis, which will also make up a large part of my specific role in this project. Technical analysis will aim to develop our understanding of the materials used and the technique of their application, the type and nature of the flaking phenomena that has presented over time and its potential causes, and correlated clues as to the object's physical history. It will include infrared reflectography, cross-section sampling and microscopy, and SEM EDX elemental analysis, amongst others. I'm very excited to share that with you next time around. Even cursory analysis of the painting through close and modified ways of looking, such as this photo of the painting in raking light and this microscope picture of the revealed surface, tells us more about both the painting's current condition and its creation. A better understanding of the nature of the painting as an object and image, the materials used in its creation, and the damage that we're seeing today has implications for both the conservation treatment and our research for this project. Clues as to how this painting was made, what it has encountered physically in its life, and the exact nature of the damage will reinforce and refine questions about the wider context of the particular painting for both Catherine Clausen's studio practice and for the Old Iron Portrait series as a whole. The results of technical analysis will also help me to better cater my treatment to this specific object and its specific damage, and increasing the likelihood of holistic treatment success. Additionally, the strategies and potential success of that conservation treatment will be enriched by the information we discover in our historical research and the further contextualization of Miss Coop as an image and object amongst the wider set.
Finally, our research questions can be summarized by these 5 main interests. First, the first concerns the selection criteria for this series. How were subjects selected out of hundreds of employees, and how does Ms. Coop fit into the wider context of the series? Also, how were the artists involved in the projects, and how did they become involved? Were they given any instructions as to the style, medium, or composition of the works? Secondly, what is the legacy of this series? Specifically, what happened to the portraits after they were displayed at Silver End? Were the portraits reproduced anywhere else besides the catalog? And what was the role of the catalog? Was the series meant to tour, as mentioned earlier, and the catalog accompany the exhibition? Thirdly, what is the extent and impact of the connection between Clausen and Courtauld with Courtauld?
Another focus will follow how our specific artist, K.F. Clausen, became involved. Thinking about the materials used and their possible role in the damage that we're seeing, can we learn anything about her studio practice? Additionally, we wonder how unique the materials and deterioration observed in Miss Coop is across the old iron set, and what that might tell us about the disparate physical histories of different portraits from the series. Finally, what is the precedent for the old iron series in the art historical and social history of Britain? How unique is this project?
In order to answer these questions, we will continue to study the Courtauld archives at the Braintree District Museum, which we've already visited once, and material from the Silver End Heritage Society and the Royal Academy Archives tomorrow, as the latter contains an extensive collection of George Clausen's daily journals and accounts.
In addition to technical analysis, I will be exploring what can be found of other painted works by Catherine Clausen and of her studio practice, and hope to conduct a closer visual examination of several of the other portraits from the Braintree's collection, to further shed light on how this collaborative series came to be and the physical legacies of different members of the set.
It is really our hope that our combined perspectives in art history and conservation will create a holistic investigation into the legacy of Miss Coop and the Old Iron series, and together we can create a roadmap for future scholars to use.
I'd like to end with a thank you. Us with the star, Miss Coop. Thank you to Painting Fair's organizers, Aviva Burnstock, Karen Sayers, and Pippa Balch, and to the Research Forum, as well as Claire Willits and Robert Rose from the Braintree District Museum for all of their help, and to all of you for listening today. We're really looking forward to sharing our findings with you in May. Happy to take any questions as well.
It's interesting that you said one portrait with flaking along the bottom.
Yes.
And
would you like me to go back to that?
Yeah, it makes you think, well, I wonder how much of it is her technique and that specific canvas, or if it was a, environmental thing. Or...
Absolutely, that's what I'll be investigating.
If there are more,
There are more. I know. I have the conservation records from the work that was done in 2019. It was basically a 2-day survey of the set that they have at the Braintree District Museum, and it has a good deal of detail as to the current condition of the the condition of the painting in 2019. So I'll be able to read through that and across the set, and then hopefully also get to do some visual examination, preferably at the back of the canvas, because the canvas is of particular interest to me, knowing that it was commercially primed.
I'm interested in the facing that you had to remove and the fact that it was covering the whole painting. And as a conservator, do you have any feelings about whether that's a good idea to, when you come across a painting that's obviously got some structural issues and you're not going to treat it and a facing to put over the whole thing? I mean, did you encounter any difficulties doing your treatment so far because of that wholesale facing over the whole painting?
I am currently undergoing difficulty in dealing with that facing, and probably will be for quite a little while. The facing itself is quite a double-edged sword. Without it, I think we would have lost quite a bit more paint between 2019 and today, so I cannot fault that interventive measure at that moment. The material is used. It's a very light adhesive called carboxymethylcellulose, and a very heavyweight Japanese tissue. So not a lot of consolidation or reintroduction of adhesive to the paint layer was done at the time of the facing, which might have saved a bit more
of this issue, which I think, say here, the facing is kind of actually lifting away already. It's failing in doing its job at this stage in many places of the painting. So that definitely complicates how I can approach the painting. It's saved quite a bit of it, so thank goodness for that. But the barrier of the facing and me characterizing the surface and the necessity of me to remove that facing before I can do my treatment or even during the process of my treatments is a complex thing that I am currently noodling around and trying to figure out how to work.
Why is it called the Organised series?
So, I'll bring you back to, I think the old iron, of course referring to the Courtauld company as an ironmonger, and then this title page of the catalog says old employees of the Courtauld Manufacturing Co. Ltd. So we're trying to figure out exactly what they mean by that, if these were already retired people from the company and why that specific set of employees was chosen.
Yeah, that's especially looking at these men, they all seem to be a little bit older, so especially higher. But I think asking those questions that might seem a bit obvious actually provide further roadmaps for our research, and especially as Kat was saying, looking into the catalog and really having definitive answers as to like their involvement with the company at this time that this was produced can be very, very helpful. I particularly like the portrait in the middle because you have this man holding the tool in the background, just very dimly almost. You see this fire burning. You see the fire that he might be using to make something out of iron later. So that's just a personal reason, but it's a great question. Thank you. Sure, middle. So great. Yeah.
Do you know or have access to any other works by Mexicans that you can process with specifically?
That is in process as part of our research. Not too many of her works are in institutions that allow me to access them in the way that they are. There's a body color on paper at the British Museum. Most of her works that can be readily found are her etchings. So in terms of material comparison, not much help with this specific portrait, but I'm still hopeful that there'll be something that we can find, or even just photographic evidence of things that might reveal sort of similar deterioration patterns that might cause us to have some sort of linkage there.
Or maybe even with her father's archives, maybe he kept records of materials that he bought and then that maybe she used. So come back in May and we'll keep going. Yeah, in the back.
Really fascinating, thank you very much. What do we know of the family that owned the company's political and religious affiliations? Thinking of the context, people go back to the 19th century Titus Salt, and then the Bournevilles, the Bourne villages, Port Sunlight, these model villages, interesting work participation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more research on our part needs to be done there as to the family's views. We do know that they were incredibly interested in art specifically. That comes up again and again, and actually you can see this lovely cover of the old iron was actually illustrated by one of the family members who had a penchant for what we'll call graphic design. And so that's a common theme that comes up again and again, is how tied this particular family was to the art world of the UK at this time.
And we also know that they were heavily involved in World War I efforts and making works out of iron for World War I.
The munitions factory during World War I.
There's kind of already a nationalistic penchant there perhaps, but looking more seriously into their religion, political affiliations is a great question. But we can definitely view Silver End as kind of a utopic kind of idea of this model village for employees, which was always very fascinating to us that this company in the early 20th century is caring towards employees in what it's in this way, it seems. So
in a very deliberate way, and also to honor them in the form of art is also a particular. We're trying to figure out how unique this would be the precedent for that. Mm-hmm. We do know also.
Sunlight does the same with Lady Lever in the Lever soap factory.
Yes.
So it'd be maybe good.
Definitely an interesting comparison.
Yeah. And I don't know about Salt there, what if that one was had art involved.
Yeah, and Bourneville, as
Yeah,
Michael said.
that's a good point.
Speaking of employee well-being, they actually refit a bunch of their machinery following World War I to be used by people with disabilities to increase their ability to hire veterans. Just another interesting bench to that as well.
Yeah, this is more of an observation, but in English there's the phrase any old iron. Any old iron. Is it part of a little dicty? Any old iron is really important.
Yeah.
Suggest, I mean, in traditional English conversation, any old iron means something that's not important, dismissive. So the fact that they've got a project. Any old iron, any old iron. It's an iron.
Yeah, we're both American.
Tragically American.
So thank you.
Yeah. There's a lovely humour in this because any old iron means unimportant people.
That's
So there we have them immortalized in art.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
In the title.
That's a great observation. Thank you.
And also, I would say, just from graphics and left-leaning politics of the era, the black and white with the red and gold type like that, like Helvetica or predating. You know, it's got a socialist left-leaning aesthetic, obviously. But I don't know if that's come up. So yeah, the any old iron elevating people who are not considered so important.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think the other thing about poetry might be long service.
Absolutely. Okay. In terms of the employees and their tenure at the company.
Yeah, which ones were selected were those with 21 years of services.
Absolutely. Definitely an angle to look at.
Yes, in front.
It's more of an observation again as well, but I thought it was interesting that you said that they're involved in the war effort, and you're asking about a context or previous examples of this, and of course the war art of World War One, going into factories and workers as a context. And most of the artists that were on the advisory panel were war artists themselves, so there's a link between Klaus and
Yeah, George Clason was actually an official war artist during World War I, and he did a series of lithographs on munitions factories. So we're investigating if that was a potential link between him personally and the Courtauld company.
Are you in touch with any of the Clausen family, and have you seen any portraits of Catherine? Because I am aware of the portrait of Catherine in her sort of peasant blouse in her private collection. Is this something that you...
Do you know if it's by her father, George?
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I can share that with you.
We would love that. Yes, please.
We're in conversation, especially with Silver End Historic Society, because they have kind of kept records of family members of people whose family members were portrayed in the series and who might have received catalogs. So we're trying to piece that together as well. We hope to not only kind of make a more holistic investigation into this coup, but also perhaps map out the other players in this series, whether both the subjects and also their descendants, and where the series might have then traveled or been.
And in terms of Catherine Clausen, you know, she worked very closely with her dad, especially in these years. He was doing the St. Stephen mural at the Houses of Parliament during the years of the Old Iron Portrait Commission, and she's noted as having been his assistant. So we're going to be tracking that and how close their relationship was and the potential that they might have shared studio space and maybe even materials.
I've got a question about the damage to this particular damage, which seems to be in the background and not in the foreground.
Yes.
And that the relationship, the way you showed comparisons, it seems to me that all the paintings are the same dimensions, are they?
They seem to be.
Okay.
Not exactly, but there's definitely a cohesive, I mean.
Right, but not only that, but they're not by the same artist, are they?
No.
So making links between, and it's not as if everyone was supplied with the same kind of canvas, so you wouldn't necessarily expect them all to deteriorate in the same way, would you? Or would you?
That's the question. I'm wondering if there's the potential for them to have been supplied a set of materials for this commission. Unlikely, but definitely something that I'd be looking into.
But not if they're not the same format.
Exactly.
Yeah, for ease of presentation, we've kind of cropped everything, but when you pull out the slide, like the walls in the Braintree Town Hall, you have portraits that are horizontal, that are very large, you have some smaller vertical ones, but they all have kind of the same composition of half length, half turned towards the painter, and either, showcasing their hands somehow, whether at rest or involved in work. So So there's a similarity in terms of composition, but in terms of material, I don't think that any really technical analysis has been undertaken.
Not as
But also not by the same artist.
But they're not,
Exactly.
but were they, but if it's the same composition, were they given material
Get some
that's...
guidelines.
Yeah,
I'm wondering
right.
too if Catherine herself is like kind of an outlier because we're investigating whether the other artists were students at the time and if they would have been working at the Royal Academy in a combined studio potentially for this project, but she was an outlier. And then as Maureen said earlier, also the physical history of how these things have been stored together might be the unifying link in their damages and if there's any similarity there as well that has to do with environmental conditions.
You guys plan on sleeping between now and then?
Just with Miss Cooper in the studio.
One more question.
No, I just suddenly, not suddenly, I've been looking at it for ages, but it makes me think of adverts at the time. Have you looked at the media at the time? Because it is an image like for selling something actually quite American.
It's selling the job.
Yeah.
Especially because the few women depicted in this series all seem to be a bit younger versus the men are older, so then maybe they're retired. Are they trying to sell working in a company to women? And we haven't looked at that too much yet, but there is this
this idea too of how the company would have used these portraits.
Exactly.
For a means to an end, the potential of that.
Exactly. Was there text that accompanied? Like if you saw a portrait, did it have title card? It's really, really interesting. So we will not sleep much, but we will get those answers.
It's a very great question, but were you able to find any personal narratives of the sitters? Has anyone gone on the record, find any record of the sitters' experience of being painted in any?
We have not found anything yet, but that is a hope that in speaking to the Silver and Heritage Society, we might be able to get some accounts or even speak to some family members that might still be alive today.
Well, and then it brings up, were the employees' voices even a part of this series? Were they just simply painted and then they went back to work? Did they sit down and give kind of an interview? It's another very good question for us to add to our list.
Yeah, one that we brought up is if they were currently working at this time, did they take the time out to sit for a portrait, or was a photograph taken of them and then given to the artist? Questions that we're thinking of. Well, thank you so much, everyone. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming today, and the 4th of May is the conclusion to this, and I hope you'll all come to that. And thank you. It was a really lively session. Brilliant. Thanks.